Alright, so this latest chapter of My Hero Academia serves to establish how exactly the heroes plan on taking down the villains, Eraserhead visits Aoyama in prison, and we have the return of Shinso. With the previous chapter, Deku and Ida made their way to the development studio and met up with Hatsume Mei, who, if you remember, fell directly on Deku yet again, which, funny enough, did not trigger his danger sense at all, as I suppose technically he wasn't in any danger. Anyway, they had gone to her in hopes that they would be able to have their hero costumes repaired. And they didn't send a request to the item agency because with the current state of the country, the exchange of commerce has been greatly disrupted, something that Hatsume, much to Deku's shock, seemed to be oblivious to. Now, as compared to before, the development studio looked very differently. And this was because the support course, and more specifically Power Loader Sensei, was in charge of research, development, and maintenance of the UA barrier. Deku would then show Hatsume his now destroyed prototype gauntlets, which were sent from overseas, boasting the latest and greatest in compression technology. Deku would make it clear that he would need it repaired rather quickly, to which Hatsume would reply that she absolutely could not do so. With the damage it had sustained, she would pretty much be making them from scratch herself, and they lacked the available resources to match the compression technology. And in the case of Ida's armor, without the specification documents, they would be impossible as well. However, since Hatsume wouldn't, two other members of the support course offered to be of assistance instead. Meanwhile, Hatsume herself had been entrusted with the creation of new and creative mechanisms for the sake of mass evacuations and the like. Something she took very seriously as, according to her, before you know it, a perfect plan can break down to be less than perfect, so it's important to be meticulous and have contingencies. What I imagine will be words worth remembering when it comes to the hero's plan for victory. Now, despite seeming to be incredibly hyper-focused, it wasn't as if Hatsume was oblivious to the happenings of the outside world. However, from her perspective, inventing things is how the members of the support corps get to be heroes as well. That being said, in the little bit of time it took for this conversation to happen, with her left hand alone, Hatsume managed to create replacement gear for Deku and Ida. For Deku, these new gauntlets weren't the latest and greatest in technological advancements, but they should still be of use to him. For Ida, this new armor was not an exact replica, but it too should be able to work just fine. And I have to further stress how impressive this really is, not only because she was able to do all of this in a matter of seconds, not only because she was able to do this with only her left hand. No, what really impresses me is that she was able to recall the exact measurements of these two characters on the fly just like that, after months of having not measured them or be made to make things for them. This is really impressive, not to mention that over that span of time so much has happened and she is still able to recall this information and apply it. That is insane. But along with this, Hatsume had a message for the rest of the hero course. Let's win this. From there, Deku and Ida made their way back to the rest of Class 1A, who are all ready to enter the field. Here they sought to clean up the threat of the Liberation Front and the League of Villains as soon as possible, so they will again be living up to our predictions for this period of time, where our young heroes will be picking up the slack and cleaning up the streets. Now, of course, with that being said, they had only just lost Aoyama the day before, so they were still recuperating emotionally, but could not afford to waste even a single day of progress. But even despite this, they were confident in the fact that their friend would return to them in due time. Deku was to be at the center of this search squad operation. Yet at the same time, these kids were not the only ones in the field, however, as in the Kansai region, Fat Gum, Ryukyu, Sun Eater, and Nejire, with a new shorter hairstyle, were all out and about and anticipating a major final battle as well. Which then leads us to the involvement of our former symbol of peace, All Might, and the details of their Plan B and the so-called other battle that may decide their fate. With this latest chapter, we begin in Central Hospital, a location with several police stations located in pretty close proximity. Here we would have the Anti-Paranormal Liberation Front Task Force, with its main speaker again being All Might. The figures present in this room were those who had worked without rest as they considered the many factors and bits of evidence available to them in regards to the case of Aoyama, allowing them to proceed with the intentions they have for him. Endeavor and Best Genius would be overseeing the main hero force, however with the current nature of things they would be conducting their plans with as few people as possible for the sake of safety. Now among this collective was Ragdoll of the Wild Wild Pussycats, who on account of her involvement has been away from the rest of her group for quite a while now. But for as unfortunate as they may be, her former quirk, Search, was being used for nefarious purposes, and so for that, she felt a strong obligation to fight the good fight in any way that she possibly could. And with that, between Hawks, Ragdoll, and All Might, this group seems to be comprised of heroes who have largely lost their power but still remain intent on doing what they can, and I think that's pretty admirable, that's pretty cool. But with that, All Might would begin his detailing of the plan, fully equipped with custom pins and all. And in my head, either All Might stayed up all night doing arts and crafts, or he simply had Momo use her quirk to create these for him before making his way to this meeting. Now at its core, the plan was very simple: separate All for One and Shigaraki from one another. According to the battle records provided by his confrontation with Star and Stripe, it is now clear to them that Shigaraki has well surpassed the strength of All for One. All for One, of course, being known to be absurdly powerful himself, as made evident by his final fight against All Might and the destruction of Tartarus. Now, on account of their radio wave-based communications, the heroes are currently unaware of how developed the shared consciousness between the two villains may be, but if nothing else, they were rather certain that to engage the two simultaneously would be an automatic failure on their part with no chance of victory. A statement which prompted the former members of Star's squad to question why All for One didn't fight alongside Shigaraki against Star if these two were so powerful together, which All Might responded to by saying that Star would have been able to use New Order on him, as calling him All for One would actually be accurate. Now, more specifically, the plan for these two was to have them be separated by at least 10 kilometers, which is about 6 miles. And they needed to do this at the very least if they were to have any shot at victory. Now, obviously the villains would want to avoid this sort of scenario to the best of their ability. That being said, based on what they had seen Dabi be capable of, if he were to protect them, they would have no chance at separating the two. And so they needed to isolate him as well. And not only him, but the entirety of the League. Each and every one of their main forces needed to be lured out and crushed one by one. A rather difficult circumstance to achieve, but one they believe may actually be possible with the use of Aoyama. Aoyama, who was currently still wavering, unfortunately. Tsukauchi was able to sympathize with the kid on some level, but at the end of the day, the things he did were completely unacceptable and were a betrayal to all of society as a whole. And so he was pretty skeptical, but All Might had hope for the boy still. Which brings us to Aoyama's incarceration and his visitation by Aizawa. According to the doctors, there seem to be no signs of any dangerous mechanisms or abnormalities linked to All for One's influence. And now thinking about it, if All for One really had any means of blowing Aoyama up, there would have been no need for him to demonstrate the death of traitors in front of them previously. That the only thing All for One truly placed in Aoyama was a crippling and haunting terror. Aizawa's first question would be if Aoyama was afraid, which totally shook him. He'd express how lucky Aoyama is to have friends who would stand up for him like they did. Now asking him more specifically if he was afraid of All for One, which he absolutely was. Not only that, but he feared that he would never be able to shine as brightly as the others, and that the more they believe in him, the less confidence he possesses. That even if he were to return to all of them, if All for One were to appear before him as well, he feared he might just do the same thing all over again. And that is what he feared the most. And so at this point, all he wanted to do was be thrown away somewhere all alone and die. Aizawa would be very honest with Aoyama, that despite the circumstances, there was no excuse for his actions, and that even if they succeed, he could not guarantee that the boy would be able to remain at the school. His friends put it nicely for him, but Aizawa was going to be blunt here. Aoyama needed to fight. There was no other option left for him. And here, Aizawa intended to take away Aoyama's fear one way or another. Aoyama knew what he needed to do, but was still struggling, as Aizawa would further explain that like All for One, they would be using him for the sake of their own interests, that they were no different, which really caught Aoyama's attention. But even still, Aizawa wasn't going to let him just die in some dark hole, that so long as he was in charge of the class, he would take care of all of his students, and that again, he personally does not intend to expel him from UA. That even if he feels horrible and worthless, he needs to walk along with those who would lend him a hand. A sentiment which reminded him of his dear friend turned Nomu. He promised to protect Aoyama, that so long as they were all together, everything would be okay. And thankfully that was enough for Aoyama to gather himself for the most part and accept. Yet at the same time, he wasn't exactly sure how he would be helpful at all. At which point a bit of a smile would return to Aizawa's face, as Aoyama seemed to be a bit better now. It only made sense for Aoyama to be afraid, but he wasn't alone and they wouldn't be sending him in on his own. Which would then bring us to Shinso being called to action as he hung from a tree with his capture tape in a way that I am sure is Horikoshi paying homage to Spider-Man, which I absolutely love. Shinso is the perfect person to pair Aoyama with, since as an informant, the expression of information is what he is expected to do, allowing Shinso an opportunity to make use of his quirk. Here on the channel, we have been anticipating the return of Shinso and certainly expect his quirk to play a major role in these developments. That being said, his quirk is unlikely to be effective against All For One and Shigaraki for more than perhaps a few seconds, like how it had been for Deku in the past, on account of vestige rejection. But regardless, now that they actually know how Deku's quirk works, I'm sure that is something they would have considered as well. This is Shinso's moment to be a hero like he has always wanted to, with some major field experience to boot. And although currently class is not in session, it sure feels like he has joined the class, especially if there's an empty seat now that Aoyama is compromised. Right now, as fans, I'm sure everyone is excited to just jump right into things to get the ever hyped up battle to decide it all going. But with only a year left of this series remaining, the wait will not be long at all. And you shouldn't wait to subscribe to Plot Armor with notifications on, because when it comes to bringing you some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.